Do you know someone who might fall quite frequently or seem quite accident prone, so bumping into things or tripping over? So for someone with sensory processing difficulties, it can be relating to their motor-based processing. So people with dyspraxia, messages are equally spread out for people with dyspraxia, which means that a lot of the time they're ambidextrous, so find it easier to do activities with any hand rather than just the one hand. But for other people with modulation difficulties, so processing the amount of information which they're receiving, it could be relating to proprioceptive awareness. So if I'm hyposensitive to proprioception, I need lots and lots of input to be aware of it. So therefore, by tripping over, I'm not receiving enough information yet. And so I might be seen to trip over. I might bang into things because I'm not quite sure of where my body is in space around me. So when I'm walking through a door frame, I might bump into the side. Now you might recognise a characteristic of coping with this as some people trailing their finger along the sides of the walls or holding the sides of the wall as they walk through a space. That's helping them to represent or to visually recognise or to feel where they are in their environment and how they're able to move through that space. When we fall over, we are then very much aware of where our body is in space. We're going to feel parts of our body hitting the ground, so we're getting that tactile input. But generally it's because someone isn't necessarily aware when they're walking of where they're placing their foot when they put it down the next time. So waking up activities, so jumping, anything where we're using our feet to tell us where we are before we then start walking or before we then start doing an activity will really, really support them. For other people, it might be that they're hypersensitive to vestibular input. So again, if you think about spinning around in lots of circles and walking in a straight line, you're going to find that quite difficult to do because you're feeling dizzy. That's similar to how someone might be feeling who's hypersensitive, have a really small, low threshold, so a low amount of information before they're being overwhelmed by that sensation. So by falling over, by bumping into things, it could be because they're already receiving a lot of motion, a lot of movement sensations, so they bump into things because they're finding it difficult to locate how to move throughout that space. Or maybe they're becoming confused with an environment, so it becomes easier to bump into items of furniture, tables, or to trip over other people, purely because they don't necessarily recognise it or identify it. For other people I know, it can be relating to hypervisual processing difficulties too. So I talk a lot about how vestibular and visual work together, but for this I mean walking on gravel. There's even more visual information. I know many people who find it difficult to walk or to move on gravel because of the amount of visual information there is. If there's patterned carpets, if there's patterned flooring, all of those things can be overwhelming for people with visual processing difficulties, especially if they're hypersensitive. Those patterns are giving them even more sensations, which means that they can become overwhelmed a lot easier. And so a way of coping with that is by removing that from them, so they're not going to look where they're walking with their feet down, or they're going to cover their eyes. They're going to try and reduce that visual input of some sort.